It's easy to forget as we move about our daily lives that Philadelphia is actually not that old of a city. It's relatively new. For thousands of years, Native people made their homes, their families, their lives in this land.
The traditional way we tell the story of Philadelphia begins with its founder, William Penn. But centuries before Penn himself is even born, this lush, fertile land has already been shaped by trial and triumph, conflict and negotiation, peace and war.
Before there was a place that was called Philadelphia, there was the land of the Lenape. The Creator had given it to us to hold and care for.
Today, the Philadelphia region is home to 6 million people from all over the globe. But until a few hundred years ago, the land was home to one tribe. For generations, we have called them Delawares, or Lenape. But they call themselves Lenni Lenape.
My name is Chitomak Karaniak. That means quiet hawk. I didn't know I was Lenape. I just knew I was Indian. Didn't know anything about my history because everybody was afraid to talk about it.
The Lenape are the original people of this land. Archaeological evidence has proven that they've been here for 13,000 years.
When the ancient ones arrived here, one of the things that caused their journey to end was this was the edge of the continent. This was where the sun rose.
Their world spans across the modern-day Mid-Atlantic region. Delaware, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The Lenape refer to it as Lenape-Hoking. At the center is the river, the pulsing Lenape-Wihituk.
The river was the lifeblood of the land. It's sacred to our people, and we traversed up and down the river in dugout canoes.
The Lenape-Wihituk was the source of a lot of food. It was a source of communication. It was a way that communities could travel to be with one another along the riverside.
The Lenapes put value on freedom, and that extended throughout the structure of their society. Not every Native American believed that. The Lenapes did.
In our society, the women were the ones to make the important decisions. They were the ones to appoint the chiefs.
Women were the holders of all property.
It was really important to them to maintain a balance. And they were very much aware of balance in all of nature.
When a woman got tired of her man, if he wasn't providing in the way that she thought he should, she put his stuff outside of their home, and that was it.
The Lenape women exercised power because they also controlled, to a large extent, the land.
Now, in 1620, the land is threatened as European explorers carve up the continent the original people called Turtle Island and make new places, Massachusetts, New Amsterdam, and Virginia. They pressure tribes into war with each other and put Lenape control at risk. How long can the original people survive?
The other tribes defined strength by forming this huge confederacy. The Lenape weren't interested in doing that. They were not a warlike tribe. Their strength was their peacefulness. But they were certainly fierce enough warriors when they had to be.
The Great Iroquois League up to the north of us were making war with one another.
The Iroquois move south and do very harsh things to the Susquehannocks. The Susquehannocks, in turn, beat up on the Lenape.
The Lenape were often not in a position to mobilize militarily, which some other peoples to their north and south and west could.
In a world of shifting alliances, the Lenape cannot be sure who is friend or foe.
The Lenapes at first seemed to be losing, but the war ended with more or less a truce. with the Lenape saying, this is not your land, this is Lenape land.
Our people were numerous at one point. Early explorers that talk about the campfires being so plentiful that they lit the sky even when they were still approaching the shoreline.
Those explorers, in search of power and profit, now descend into the Lenape hoking.
The European who's coming here, walking along the coast, is seeing a fervid, green, overwhelmingly wild-feeling kind of place that looks completely different than anywhere in Europe.
Thick, dense brush, tall trees, a tremendous amount of wildlife.
It's like a jungle.
European colonizers were interested in extraction. They were interested in getting in quick and pulling resources out that would be valuable for sale in Europe. That meant that European governments did not want to put large amounts of money into protecting and securing settlements.
In 1609, Henry Hudson, the English explorer with the Dutch East India Company, is one of the first Europeans to chance upon the Lenape-Wihituk. But he does not find what he is looking for. He sails up to what the Lenape call Mannahatta.
The Dutch quickly figure out that access to the beaver trade is much better from Manhattan. So that's where the money goes, that's where the people go.
With their base in Manhattan, the Dutch envision a formidable commercial empire that stretches to the Lenape-Wihituk. They establish a trading post in what today is Lewis, Delaware, and name it Swannendale, the Valley of the Swans.
The Dutch wanted to trade with the Lenapes. They start building, they start planning.
When the first Europeans came, the initial response of my Lenape ancestors was to greet them, to show hospitality. The Lenape people were the diplomats. They were the negotiators.
Trade means new opportunity, but the Lenape know it also signals danger.
When Lenape people watched Europeans pull up, this wasn't the first time they'd heard about folks like them. The Lenape were forewarned. They'd heard about people who showed up in big boats with white skin and interesting trade goods before they even saw these people.
We had boundaries, but are we willing to let you cross our boundaries or do what you, as long as you showed respect when you were doing it?
At Swannendale, the Dutch mark their territory by painting their coat of arms onto a tin sign and posting it in the woods. They speak of property and ownership, concepts as foreign to the Lenape as the clothes on the strangers' backs.
We did not view the land as something that could be bought or possessed by individuals.
It would never occur to them that anyone would take more than they need.
We were willing to share, but they were our guests.
The tin sign is a mark of Dutch ambition the Lenape can't quite interpret. A Lenape man removes it and fashions the valuable tin into tobacco pipes.
The Dutch aren't happy. It's their sign. They thought they had bought this land. And so they call in Lenapes to ask them what happened.
Goodwill dissolves into confrontation. Hoping to blunt the Dutch reaction, Lenape chiefs sacrifice the thief and deliver his head. The Dutch are horrified and confused.
One confusion like that led to another, one misunderstanding piled on another.
The Dutch decide that the act was a threat to their authority. In Swannendale, they expect the Lenape to live by their laws. Angered by the loss of their friend and recognizing that their sacrifice had been made in vain, 3 Lenapes approach the Dutch settlers one by one.
The Lenape descended on the settlement and wiped out everyone.
Dutch had come into our territory and were not interested in following the rules and traditions.
The massacre at Swannendale was a message that was heard around the colony.
Boundaries get set. Subsequent Europeans certainly know that they're outnumbered. If they push things too far with the native population, this sort of thing can happen again.
The story that's told by my relatives in Delaware even today is that indeed it was a victory.
Swannendale is decimated. The Dutch will not return to the area for a generation. Europeans remain obsessed by this new world, a world that offers opportunities for wealth and status. The Swedish want what the Dutch and the English have long had, global reach.
In the 17th century, the Swedes are not a genuine international power. The Swedes are aspiring, they're ambitious. They need to find a place where there's not going to be competition.
King Gustavus Adolphus is the bold leader of Sweden and has conquered much of Northern Europe.
Gustavus also dreams of Swedish empire in other places. Why, after all, if the English and the French and the Spaniards and the Dutch are getting into the extraction game in North America, why can't the Swedes? It becomes a marker of empire.
Gustavus envisions New Sweden, a colony that would challenge Dutch control over the Atlantic coast of North America.
Now, will it take off? Well, that depends on how it's financed in the future.
Immediately, the colony is set back when Gustavus is killed in battle. The idea languishes with his young daughter, Queen Christina, and her parochial court. But they eventually enlist Peter Minuit, a capitalist mercenary, to develop New Sweden. In 1638, with 2 ships and 70 men, Minuit sets out for the Lenape-Hoking.
Minuit meets with Lenape sachems or chiefs, and they arrive at an agreement. Minuit thought he was buying Lenape lands from the mouth of the bay on up past the site of modern-day Philadelphia.
But during a tropical storm in the Caribbean, Minuit dies. How will New Sweden survive?
The 24 men that were left behind struggled. They had lost their commander. And that's devastating to this small group of men. They have to reorganize and think carefully about what's going to happen next.
You come to this place and you must feel like anything is possible. At another level, you're absolutely terrified.
Peter Gunnarsson Rambo, a 27-year-old indentured servant, endures the hardship of the new colony. When his servitude ends in 1642, he is finally a free man, and with the desire to chart his own course, he decides to stay.
Peter Gunnarsson Rambo made good on his contract and then became a free farmer on the Passyunk plantation. He cultivated his farm so beautifully and was known for his apple trees and for his beautiful vegetation.
But just as Rambo and his fellow settlers begin to assert their independence, they must contend with the arrival of a new governor sent by the Swedish crown to shore up the failing colony. An imperious man named Johan Printz.
Johan Printz weighs about 300 pounds. So he's a large individual. His nickname in Lenape was translated as Big Tub or Big Belly. And that would seem natural for a person who was there standing in front of you, swearing and drinking beer.
Governor Printz's official dealings with our people and what I have read that he wrote back to his own government often were 2 very different things.
Johan Printz wrote, "Nothing would be better than that a couple of 100 soldiers should be sent here and kept here until we broke the necks of all of them in the river." That's not what you would say about trade partners who you value highly and consider your friends.
But Printz is thwarted by Queen Christina's indifference.
The Swedes never had enough people to really put the Lenape off the river and take everything that they have. There's just not enough Swedes to make that happen.
The weakness of the colony is an opening for Rambo and the other landholders who organize a revolt against Printz's autocratic regime.
If he thinks that somebody is not obeying his rules, who is not generating enough for the crown, then he would crack down. And he had no problem cracking down on the Swedes.
A number of the settlers signed a petition protesting his high-handedness.
Rambo's rebellion is the first in a long chain of Philadelphia experiments in revolution and independence. But Printz reacts with a violence of his own.
Words lead to other words lead to threats, and Printz has one of the protesters arrested.
In the one-man court of Johan Printz, the protester, Printz's own soldier, is convicted of treason and forced to stand in front of the executioner's gun.
The Swedes said, "You are punishing us in ways that aren't fair, and you are also costing us the promise of our freedom."
Queen Christina recalls the governor in 1653. His daughter Armigo stays behind and becomes one of the first European women to own land in the New World. But the departure of the governor leaves New Sweden without a strongman, and it doesn't take long before the Dutch sail back in to reestablish their southern port.
The Swedish flag came down, the Dutch flag went up, and that was the end of an independent New Sweden.
The New Sweden colony itself is short-lived, but its imprint endures in Philadelphia.
We have Christian Street, which is named after Queen Christina. Since the beginning of the settlement, Philadelphia reflected Queen Christina's sovereignty here.
There's one part of New Sweden that still survives, the blue and the gold of the flag of the city of Philadelphia.
But the first and most lasting European imprint is disease. Smallpox, influenza, malaria, and other viruses strike and devastate the Lenape.
You didn't require major contact, either socially or economically, to spread viruses.
Before anybody in this area had laid eyes on a European, they were already seeing villages die off.
When they're trading with the Europeans and they're trying to incorporate the Europeans into their world, accommodate them in essence, they're dying from that.
A chief told a missionary that for every one of you that arrives on a boat, 10 of us die. There are stories of there not even being enough people left in villages to bury the dead.
When Europeans developed phrase books as a kind of shorthand for communicating with the native tribes, you get a constant recurrence of phrases like, "I cough," "I sweat," "I feel sick."
The loss is swift and stunning. More than 3/4 of native people in the mid-Atlantic will die from European diseases.
Some of the diseases attacked the oldest and the youngest. And so the ones that were the keepers of the wisdom and the ones that had the strength to perpetuate the communities were being wiped out. That reshaped our whole world.
You're living in a household with your family. Tomorrow you wake up and someone dies, and you mourn. But then 2 days later, someone else dies. And then a month passes, and more people die. And that continues onward for years.
Disease not only decimates the Lenape population, it also jeopardizes their land. Now, there is even more territory open for the taking.
Many colonists thought that they were being favored by the hand of God, that disease was clearing the land for Europeans.
The Europeans' fight for religious and military domination escalates on the battlefield and in the sea. the English defeat the Dutch and seize all of New Netherlands, consolidating the Crown's control of the American coast.
The land that would become Philadelphia creates a large swath of land, thousands of miles wide, ruled by the British.
Widening British power fuels religious persecution as the Church of England attempts to stamp out all other denominations.
In the English context, you have enormous religious persecution. People want to preserve their economic well-being, and they want to preserve their freedom of conscience. Those things are increasingly not possible in the motherland.
Among the many religious groups, one sect emerges as the most radical in confrontations with authority.
They quake. They're holy rollers. They shake, they tremble. When they are in their religious fervor, they're mystics. These are dangerous, threatening people. Everybody else thinks that they've lost it, thinks that they're in the midst of deliriums. They call themselves the Society of Friends. It's their enemies who call them Quakers.
But the Quakers have a powerful friend in James, Duke of York, a subversive Catholic in a Protestant nation. James prevails on his brother, King Charles II, to grant a section of their newest colony to 3 prominent Quakers, Gowan Laurie, Nicholas Lucas, and William Penn. This first Quaker settlement, West Jersey, hugs the Lenape-Wahituck. They have named for the English Baron de la Warre.
People are now starting to look at the New World as a place where persecuted religious groups can go to get out from under the thumb. Warfare, intolerance, lack of opportunity.
It was not a colony based upon a cash crop economy like its southern neighbors. It was not a colony based upon strict religious piety. It was one that accepted religion, that opened its doors, that opened its minds to the Quaker faith and the Society of Friends.
The Quaker ethos discouraged anybody coming here who was looking to get rich quick. They've got these wild-eyed notions of religious freedom, of democracy, which is unthinkable in the 17th century.
The relationship was very different. The Quakers came with an understanding of trying to coexist.
230 Quakers land on the Delaware in August 1677. Over the next 4 years, 1,400 of them will come, far surpassing the number of Swedes and Dutch on the river to that date. Different from other European colonies along the Atlantic coast, this one will introduce basic freedoms and democratic principles of a Philadelphia and a nation yet to come.
From the first European that set foot on this continent, it's only been 500 years, maybe 6, and we've been here for thousands, and we are still here.
The Lenape begin to have to think of themselves as living in 2 worlds. The world that they are part of, that includes them, and some other world that they have to accommodate.
The people who were drawn here were people warned explicitly, you're going to have to work. It isn't going to fall in your lap. But if you do, this will be the best poor man's country on earth. And it was.
In 1680, Peter Rambo is one of the last surviving settlers of New Sweden. Now a wealthy farmer, he watches as Quaker immigrants arrive in the place where he himself had overcome repression.
It was, from the very beginning, an experiment in tolerance, an experiment in diversity, in different types of people living together.
That experiment is about to take off. As the independence of West Jersey is threatened, William Penn imagines an expanded Quaker settlement in a self-governing utopia across the Delaware. The vision of a city called Philadelphia.